How can a letting agent grow their profitability from 10% to in excess of 35%? Today, I'm joined by Sally Lawson, who I consider is the best letting agency trainer in the UK, if not the world. Sally, we've known each other for years. You have the Rainmaker series, which is absolutely fantastic. You've helped loads of letting agents grow their profitability. But how exactly do you get a letting agent from 10%, which I know there's plenty not even hitting that, up to 35%? Talk to me.
Basically, nobody was really making enough money. The average to me seemed to be about 10%. We all knew the tenant fee ban was coming. We had to look at new ways to generate more revenue. And okay, a lot of people got through the tenant fee ban, which is great, but things haven't really improved. Right now, according to the Plimsoll report, the actual average profitability of the top 1,000 letting agents in the UK, that's the top, is 11.9%. And so we need to make changes. And that's one of the things I've really been focused on in the last few years is in doing that. Now, one of the key things to think about when you look at profit, I see it as levers like this. I'm just going to use my arm as levers. This is your revenue line. This is your cost line. And what's happened over the years is our income has been going down and our costs have been going up. And most letting agents are somewhere near that cross point of either 10% profit, and as you say, some are even putting money into the business. And so if you look at that cross line, there's really only two ways that you can change profitability. And it sounds obvious, but it is by increasing that revenue in or decreasing that cost out. If we can just stretch that gap from 10% to 20%, 30%, we've had many get to 50% and more, then you can make that change. And so what we're looking at is charging more, increasing revenue, increasing different lines of revenue, and reducing that profit. And it's quite simple to do when you look at it holistically.
So increase income and decrease costs. Now, many agents will try and cut the costs out without trying to look at the income. So let's look at reducing costs. Where do most agents go wrong with their costs?
So what the typical business owner thing to do is when you think, right, I need to make more profit, is like, right, I'm going to start cutting things. I'm going to cut staff. I'm going to cut advertising. I'm going to cut marketing. They're the first things that go. And in reality, they're actually the things that you need to grow. And so that seems crazy. So I always try and focus first on the top line, if that's okay. What can we do to increase revenue? Now, if you think about the letting agency model, I've been a letting agent since 1990. That's a very long time. And when I first started, there was only 3 letting agents in the town. Now there's 60, 70 plus people doing lettings in the town. It's a very competitive market. And so what's happened, our charges, our revenue per property is technically, if you compare inflation, gone down. Most letting agents are charging 8 or 9% now instead of holding out for their fees of 12%. Most letting agents aren't charging more for complex lettings like HMOs, housing benefit, overseas landlords, and so therefore those fees are even lower on those tenancy types because they're more complex and require more work. But fundamentally, what we need to do is to look at how we can make sure that we are charging for our commodity, and our commodity is time. So I want to use the restaurant analogy. We all like restaurants, don't we? You go to a restaurant and the restaurant owner has figured out that lobsters have increased by 50% and they want to sell lobsters. And so therefore, in order to still make profit on those lobsters, they need to increase the price that they sell those lobsters to the restaurant diners. Just like Sainsbury's, the cost of the logistics of getting bananas into the country, or grapes as it was in COVID, we all saw grapes go through the roof, then the price of those things will go up. Letting agents, however, since 1990, have had literally hundreds of pieces of legislation laid on them, which means their commodity, which is time, has increased and increased and increased. Their revenue has gone down. As a result, they're not making more profit. So number one, make sure that we are charging for our time. If something takes you 17 hours, work out what your hourly rate is and make sure you're charging for 17 hours, or find a cheaper way to do it. And so quite often technology, software, there's so much prop tech out there now, can make things be done a lot quicker and therefore a lot cheaper. but also we can make sure we're charging correctly for the things that we're doing by making sure we're charging for the stuff that we do.
Talking of prop tech, there's a lot of rubbish out there. How do you know what's good and what's bad?
Well, I think that's a bit of trial and error, to be fair. But I think get into groups, talk to other letting agents. There's loads of Facebook groups. You've got one, I've got one. There's plenty of opportunities to get out there, ask questions. I see it all the time. Agents come on, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? Everybody dives in, get yourself into masterminds, whatever. It doesn't matter. Start talking to other letting agents and find out what's really working.
Do you think a lot of agents are very blinkered and it's just their own little world? And
I think they very much look at the cost. They see a bit of prop tech and they think like that's £500 a month. They just see it straight on the bottom line. That's £6,000 a year I'm going to lose. What they probably don't analyse is the fact it's going to save them half a staff member, which is 11, 12, 13, 14, £15,000. So I think you've got to look at your business as a commodity, break it down into granular time units, and then calculate it back and see what you need to be charging out.
that does require an agent to have a on the business versus in the business mentality, which is a real toughie for a lot of people.
It is, I know. And, I'm an advocate for, I've just come back from a retreat actually, and we run retreats as well. I'm a real advocate for getting out of the business for a few days, a week, and just really focusing on the business. I've done it myself for years, and I know the most successful people do this too, like Warren Buffett. He spends 80% of his day reading. You've got all these people still do this because it makes sense to get out of the business and focus on the business. But that's a real good exercise. Work out how much time everything takes, work out what your hourly rate is, and then work on generally on how much you need to be charging. And there's a great little calculation. Would you like me to share it with you? All right, so those of you that are listening, just take your annual costs of the business for the year, divide that by 253 days in the year, divide that by 8 hours in the day, and then divide that by how many full-time members of staff you have, include yourself if you work in the business. And then basically you have your hourly cost rate. Now that's your cost. You don't charge out at that because obviously you wouldn't make any profit. So if you decide you want to make 50% profit and your cost is £45 an hour, then you would charge out at £90 an hour. Now, the great thing about that is once you realise what your charging point is, when a landlord rings you and says, can you wait in my house for me for 8 hours to wait for British Gas to turn up? You're going to go, certainly, sir, it's £90 an hour. When would you like me to go? And the landlord's going to say, forget it, I'll do it myself. Win-win. All of a sudden, you've just saved yourself 8 hours a day that you really shouldn't be doing anyway. So I think it's a really important exercise to work out and to know what you should be charging as an hourly rate, to understand what you need to make the profit that you want, and basically you reverse engineer it, and ultimately you've got a 50% profitability business. And that's what we coach our people through all the time.
It sounds so simple, but I'm sure there's plenty of agents listening to this that haven't done that, have they?
No, most people haven't. I'll tell you what happened, Chris. Most people, when we started trading, what we did is I'm going to be a letting agent. And we went around and we mystery shopped all the other letting agents, and we saw what we thought the average model was, and we just decided we were going to be a little bit better and probably a little bit cheaper. We built our terms and conditions and our business plan based on that, assuming that they've already done all this calculation. Well, I can tell you that from my experience of 34 years in this business, we're just copying the last generation, they're just copying the last generation, and they're copying the previous generation. The model has not changed in 34 years. We still do lettings, we still do management, and nothing else seems to change. It's crazy.
So working out your cost per hour and then working out what you actually want to earn, what should other things should agents be doing?
The big change, I think, is it's a little bit of mindset in here. But most letting agents are doing lettings and management. You think about the modern landlord. There are so many things he wants that we just don't provide. I'll give an example. My husband's an IFA. He had a landlord that went to him. The landlord had died. The landlord's wife went to him. Had got a suite of 6 properties. She needed to sell 3 in order to pay the mortgages off the other. Didn't know which ones was best to sell, best to keep. She went to him. He quoted her £5,000 to do a plan. He didn't know how to do it. He came to me. Now, why are they not going to letting agents? I'll tell you why, because they don't offer that service. Refurbishments. People will go to other companies for refurbishments. Why do they not come to letting agents? Because we don't offer that service. So it's important that we start to look at what landlords want now and say, well, how can we provide that service for the client?
It's a bit like, people want to be told what to do with great advice, like looking after their portfolio and giving them, but they don't do that, do they? They just collect the rent, and then the only conversation you have is with problems. There's a That's all they do. No wonder so many people are going to open rent.
Yeah. Well, we tend to find that most letting agents that are super optimized, 50% profitability businesses, they have about 16 different services.
So it's not a case of just charging, I'm going to charge 15%. It's a case of I'm going to charge 10, 11, 12 or whatever, but I'm going to add on extras.
Yeah, so you're going to charge for refurbishments. For example, right now, there is a lot of landlords where their mortgages are expiring and they need to sell or they need to restructure. A landlord portfolio restructure service, helping landlords to sell by finding landlords that want to buy and doing a matchmaking service. There's so many different things you can do as a letting agent rather than just lettings and management.
And just generally finding properties. It's everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
So why aren't agents doing this?
I think they just don't have time to think about it. I think they're too many on the tools, on the phone. The phones are going crazy. We've got tenants galore at the moment. Get those calls out your office. There's great tech doing that at the moment. Get those calls out the office, get some focus back, spend some time. Think about the modern landlord right now. With 82% of landlords not using letting agents for management according to the government's white paper, that's a problem. And that is because we haven't adapted to the modern landlord. They don't think they need us. And therefore, we need to get ourselves back in the game.
Well, what we'll be doing in the series of videos today is going through all those things and helping you guys and girls out in letting agency land be a more successful agent. Thank you for your time today, Sally.
Thank you.